as we push towards this energy transition towards a cleaner, greener world. Firstly, I'd like to thank our three speakers who've joined us today, and we will kickstart this with asking their opinion on the top news stories, which is currently showing on the screen. Dr. Satyam Priyadarshy is with us. Dr. Priyadarshy is a technology fellow and chief data scientist at Halliburton. Which story would you choose today, please?
Good afternoon, Michelle. Good afternoon, everyone. So I think my last couple of almost a year doing some work on understanding this oil demand. So the story that is ET's limited effect on oil demand is a interesting article that was written up, and some discussions with the CEOs and leaders in the Gulf area just last week or 2 weeks ago. We were discussing like how much will be the impact of energy transition, and if Houston's cold weather is any signature of climate change, then you know that the oil demand I don't see will actually really impact in that sense, even though energy transition will take place. Because this whole, if you look at the landscape of energy transition, is pretty complex, right? So this story, which talks about transition to have limited effect on oil demand, is a pretty interesting story to read for everyone, and it goes into numbers and details, which is really powerful to make a case as to how best to operate each of the sections of this energy players.
Especially as we're hearing so much more talk now about peak oil, perhaps even peak energy being within the decade, and this has been a discussion for quite a while, but the years being 2-3 years ahead. So as you say, it's very interesting to see how that dichotomy is going to play out. Next up is Dr. Ahmed Elkadi, the head of Energy and Underground Infrastructure Department and the director of the Energy Transition at Deltares. Dr. Elkadi, thank you for joining us. And which story grabs your eye?
Good day, everyone. Thank you for having me. I was looking at the green hydrogen prices dropping fast. I think it's an interesting topic. Hydrogen, let's say, investing in hydrogen has been outgrowing quite fast as well, which means the investment in the facilities, but in the whole chain as well of the hydrogen makes it also quite attractive, and by that also the prices start to drop. For my side, I've seen that at least the infrastructure side, where I'm a little bit attached to, that, for example, pipelines for transport of hydrogen, long-range overland pipelines, they could also be a very interesting opportunity. So they can also transport, let's say, energy, according to some reports, 10 times more energy than a long-distance electricity transmission line, at eighths of the cost. So we see how this will benefit. That means also that so that the price of the green hydrogen is dropping fast, but also the benefit from it will be large.
Well, there's been some news out in the last week from the Hydrogen Council, I believe the report's Hydrogen Insights 2021, saying that green hydrogen could be cost parity to other types by 2028, which is 2 years sooner than many expected at earliest anyway. So that narrative is already beginning to accelerate. And JP Sacy, the Middle East Regional Director for Baker Hughes C3.ai, what is your pick, please? We've had fossil fuels, we've had hydrogen. What are you going to bring?
Thanks, Michelle. Pleasure to be with you. So I'll probably pick the first story that you've put on, which is the fact that the United States officially are back into the Paris Agreement since a few days ago, which from my personal perspective and my company's perspective is an amazing news. So the company I belong to, Baker Hughes, have been committing to serious targets that are above and beyond, to a large extent, the Paris Agreement. As a company, we've committed to reduce our emissions by 50% by 2030 and 100%, so become net zero by 2050. Having those kind of super ambitious objectives at a corporate level, and obviously cascading down to our different business units, and to a certain extent, the way we do business as individuals within those corporations is really what's going to be required to achieve those objectives. And I'm increasingly convinced, Michelle. Obviously, there was a bit of skepticism 5 to 10 years ago around the reality of of climate change. I think that it's not anymore a topic that is debatable. The reality is hitting us, and the fact that the US are back into the agreement is a good news, given the fact that they're a major energy consumer, energy producer, and technology developer. So it's good news. That's it. Thanks a lot, Michel.
And of course, when you have the world's biggest economy, and as you already mentioned there, leading in the energy consumption and producing ranks as well, being a cynic at the top leadership level of what to do to address climate change, switching that round is going to be impactful at various levels, of course. So we all know that the energy transition is on the way. Oil and gas companies are clearly opened up to that significantly. We're seeing countries with their net zero targets as well. BP, for one, as an international oil company at the top of its game, has pledged to increase its wind, solar and biopower capacity from 2.5 gigawatts in 2019 to 20 gigawatts by 2025. 2.5 to 20 in 6 years. This is huge. As already has been mentioned, these targets are ambitious and necessarily so. And then to double again, more so, it's 2050 by 2030. So digitalization and digitization are big factors here and have been discussed widely as well. Barclays report said that the oil-focused digital services sector will rise from $5 billion today to more than $30 billion per year by 2025. So only 4 years away. This is very, very tight. With that in mind, Dr. Priyadarshy, are you confident that these goals and these savings can be achieved? What would you say is needed?
I think the progress that in terms of adopting digital journey, digital transformation has been significant in the last 3-4 years, even though especially the oil and gas industry started the process some 25 years ago. But I think the major change has taken place in the last, I would say, 5 years. And the adoption of, say, for cloud technology, even as of 2020, before the COVID, it was not on the radar of some of the big national oil companies and others. But suddenly in February and March of 2020, there is such an uptake on adopting cloud technology. And this is from the first-hand experience, right? We are the makers of the hybrid cloud for E&P industry. And we built that a couple of years ago, but in 2020, we saw suddenly increased adoption. And in fact, the cloud team has been the busiest team, I can tell you, in oil and gas industry. So that is the foundation, if you think of it, is the foundation for digital transformation for oil and gas sector. And then, of course, there are pieces of the puzzle that have to come together, right? One is the workflow optimization that has to take place. Then the leverage and connecting the data sets, which is still a challenge, while the industry loves to talk, and we love to talk about adopting AI and things like that, which the industry actually used for 50 years. But at scale, we are still challenging. And one of that foundation lies in this concept of data democratization or information democratization. And if you see, there have been 2 initiatives or 3 initiatives, I would say. First one was what we did, Open Earth Community. Then a couple of years later, they announced OSDU by Shell and others. And then I think this year early, they announced what is called Open AI Initiative. So you see, industry is getting there, but it is still, I think it's a long way, and even at this rate, because there are still challenges in terms of how to accelerate this space. Just building platforms only takes you so far. The cultural aspect of the organizations and the really adoption across the life cycle, instead of doing them in silos, if it continues, then its slowness will be there. The last piece of this digital transformation is the digital twin. So if you look at number of companies which are seriously building digital twins, are very few, right? And we haven't brought the whole ecosystem together to actually take advantage of it.
Dr. Priyadarshy, on the digital twin side of things, have you seen any acceleration in the last 2 to 3 years? Because that's when this has become a much more mainstream narrative. Have you seen a big change on the ground?
So, my personal view has been that it is not a single digital twin we are talking about. It is a digital twin of digital twins. right? Because we are not connected as a whole. We don't have a fully connected oil well life cycle. So you really can't have one. And it's almost impossible to some extent at the current rate to have a completely holistic view of a field because of both security reasons as well as for technology reasons. Right, and hence, but I would say yes, the acceleration has been significant because adoption of say AR, VR, adoption of drones, robotics has been actually increasing over the last 2-3 years. So
but
it's
for
like
digital twins, you're saying there still accounts for a very small amount of that market.
absolutely,
and it's a critical part as well. With digital twins specifically, have you seen a big acceleration?
absolutely,
Obviously starting. Oh, you have as well. Okay,
absolutely.
JP, just to talk about something that Dr. Priyadarshy just touched on there was about building new infrastructure, and that's only going to be part of the solution. Of course, the legacy of infrastructure needs addressing as well. Financial Times' Lex put out a figure that up to $900 billion are at risk due to stranded assets with this energy transition if it's not managed correctly. From your point of view, are you seeing companies taking the right steps to make sure their legacy infrastructure is getting the same amount of attention as R&D and new digital tools and new energy projects?
Definitely not as much as they should. The sense of urgency that we're starting to see is unfortunately not at the levels that it needs to be to drive the change that is required to achieve that truly ambitious transformation linked to energy transition. Now, before I revert back to the questions you've asked, I'm just going to put forward a super interesting study that the IEA did, I believe, 3 years ago. They were looking at coming back to the Paris Agreement and the targets of CO2 reductions over the next 50 years. So basically, the get rid of carbon, become net zero by 2070. It gives us roughly 50 years. So if we look at the technology we currently have in 2020, we estimate that with the technology available, we are able to address 25% of the problem. 25% of the problem. So there's one way of looking at it, which is positive, which is that there are things that we can do. There's another way of looking at it, which is that 75% of the problem is obviously not addressable with the technology we currently have. Now, the partially good news is that you can add 40% on top of this 25% with technology that are at early stages. We could include some of the technologies that my colleagues were mentioning. Robotics, it's really at early stages. They're being deployed more and more, but they're not massively used as they should. I would put
broader commercialization remains a massive problem as well.
Exactly, and AI would be probably in the 40%. Now, why are massive investments required? Because we're still missing 25% of the challenge. Now, we've got 50 years to figure this out.
And that's on a most optimistic basis. That 25 is most optimistic. That's assuming that other 40 is actually realized.
Exactly. Yeah. We're building on. Huh? So coming back to the question you've asked, obviously, some of the existing assets need to be readjusted, need to be recycled. Well, basically, you need to inject technologies, recent technologies that enable us to address some of the challenges those assets weren't basically properly addressing. Now, in energy management, I'm not going to say it's a walk in the park, but the technology exists. It's just corporations need to be incentivized to basically deploy those technologies, and that can only come from activist investors, and states pushing through this.
So from your point of view, they just don't realize the cliff that they're heading towards?
To a large extent, they don't. And unfortunately, a bit less in the Gulf than it is definitely in the US and in Europe. That doesn't mean it's not the case. I'm just comparatively, there's a lag that is being addressed, but 100%.
Not fast enough.
Well, let's look at some positives. Again, we can always focus on the negatives. I tend to always focus on the positives. The positives are, for example, EV adoption. Yeah, EV adoption, for example, in Dubai is becoming a reality. Who would have thought that it would have been the case 5 years ago? It is becoming a reality. Now, we're still at early stages, but the state is taking this seriously, and there's all kind of corporations that are playing the game. So it is positive. We just need to accelerate the pace. I
think now's a good time to bring in the survey question, which should be popping up on the screen. What should be oil and gas's investment priority in 2021 to mitigate their climate impact? That should be popping up shortly. I'll give you the answers so that you can get ahead of it. Blue and green hydrogen, CCS, digital technologies, which we've discussed already in depth, or renewable capacity, which I'll be asking Dr. Elkadi about shortly. So obviously blue and green hydrogen has soared to the top of the agendas for many nations and regions. We've got Europe's strategy, which is really powering ahead, Asia as well. Middle Eastern leaders are getting in the headlines saying that they want to be globally competitive hubs by 2030. And the US is also catching up, as well as other regions. So this is a major point that's capturing a lot of attention, and a lot of funds are increasing into that space as well. But should it be that way, or should we be focusing more on, just as JP mentioned, commercializing a lot of the opportunities we have already at our fingertips? CCS, the next one, digital technologies, and then renewable capacity. We'll leave that up for a couple of minutes just to give everybody a chance to answer that. While we wait, Dr. Elkadi, it'd be really interesting to see from your point of view on the renewable side, what lessons you think that oil and gas companies can learn from those who are more head down in that green space, and perhaps there isn't a natural crossover in all areas. What lessons do you think should still be learned? What are they missing?
Oh, interesting question.
It's a big question, so I apologize.
Yes. Now, renewables, I think, okay, but so part of the renewables and investment in renewables are also done by oil and gas companies, so they are actually in the game as well. The only thing is that for some of the industries in renewables, I can imagine that they started somewhat recently, so they are already adapting all the possibilities and technologies that are at hand. So when Dr. Satyam talked about digital twins, I see in offshore wind, for example, that digital twins are more and more being adapted. And it's also comparatively different operations on the oil and gas, the whole life cycle for oil and gas. When we compare it to some of the renewables, I don't say that it's a bit easier or simpler, but the life cycle is different. I mean, an offshore wind farm consists of different offshore wind turbines. Of course, there is a connectivity, there is connection to the land, transmission and everything. But the life cycle and then is a bit different. So I think lessons learned, it's a different perspective, but I could see that it's just a matter of they started utilizing already the available technologies, while in oil and gas, you need to do this transformation. So you are starting from what existing for last 50 years, and you need to go through a transformation phase. And it depends on the pace you do this transformation, where you can get, let's say, results and capitalize on what you can do. While in renewables, you're already starting with a sort of a fresh start, and then you are already adapting all the available technologies. So yeah, I'm not sure if it's really can be translated into lessons learned from what's happening in renewables. It's more that it's for me a bit of a different play field, but indeed the transformation can go faster. At least the digital transformation part in the life cycle of oil and gas, that's definitely will yield some good results.
Well, hopefully so. I mean, the fossil fuel industry has been going for 100 years-ish. And you would hope that this evolution of essentially a whole new energy ecosystem, a greener one, can learn some lessons from what we've been doing over the last 100 years, because we certainly need a bit of a step up when it comes to the ticking clock. We can't be reinventing that wheel. When it comes to wind farms specifically, have you seen, we hear a lot about a lot of the other renewable spaces, but not as much when it comes to wind farms. Have you seen much appetite from fossil fuel firms when it comes to investing in wind farms and leveraging those to help with their carbon reduction targets?
Yes, in Europe, when we look at the North Sea, a lot of the big investments are coming also from originally oil and gas companies, at least in Scandinavia, for example, Equinor, I can name. Shell had been investing in oil in wind farm. They have just shifted recently and planned that they will more invest, for example, in hydrogen as an alternative, let's say, for the net zero target. But yes, there is a lot of oil and gas companies who, in their, let's say, renewable of their decarbonization target, they invest in things like offshore wind farm, among others, and especially in the North Sea. I see that, but also happening in the US. Maybe our colleagues in the US can confirm that, but it's happening as well in the US.
Start to see that spread out a little bit more, maybe. Should we see what the survey results bring us, please? I'm keen to see which wins. Okay, digital technologies leads the way with blue and green hydrogen next. I would say that's a tie, perhaps it's my eyes, but a tie between CCS and renewable capacity. CCS perhaps just a notch or two ahead. Dr. Priyadarshy, I'm going to assume you went with digital technologies.
Yeah. So certainly that. So I think what Dr. Ahmed was saying, you see, when you look at renewable energy and especially wind and solar, and wind especially, I would say that yes, they started with what is connecting the data from the very beginning. Even when the early stage of wind energy, which was taking place in US, and I had some opportunity to work with some local wind companies, and they started with thinking of how to connect the data in the very beginning, even before the plant was installed, so to say. So this is one of the lessons that we could actually certainly take forward to the oil and gas industry. And so they were, I would call them not data native companies, but still digital native they started with. And I think that lesson is there. And if we now look at the solar farms that are being built at the large scale, they are actually connecting a lot of different technology. In fact, some of my friends who work in this space, they're building these robots for cleaning the solar farms through robotic means rather than through human beings. And that itself saves a significant cost. And this is all data-driven and sensor-driven technologies. And so some of these things can be implemented, as our friend JP was saying, that, this adoption looks at a digital technology adoption looks moving forward. But as he was putting some percentages on it of AI and digital, those numbers are really staggering, because this industry should really accelerate that and increase that. And especially when it comes to infrastructure, the miniaturization of sensors has taken place. I think it's a perfect time to take advantage of it on even the critical infrastructure that exists today. Because
I think it's something like $100 billion potential savings by 2025 by oil-focused sectors increasing their digitalization. And in a world where the oil prices have been low for quite a while, we have the economic recovery from COVID-19, and then obviously dealing with the cost of the broader energy transition as well. That $150 billion in savings is quite lucrative, really.
Absolutely. Like one of the major power, if you look in the oil and gas industry, one of the big metrics has been like non-productive time. And one of the classic case study that we published a couple of years of analyzing a non-productive time from unstructured data, which was nothing like small percentage. It showed it's roughly can be $200 million for a very small project, right? And if you multiply that and scale it up, it will range in the numbers that you are talking about, Michelle, right? And certainly there is significant cost savings and capital savings that exist if the digital technologies are applied at the right time, I would say now. I think technology is not the bottleneck anymore.
I see. And of course, the more savings are made, the more investors' confidence is bolstered, and the more funds can be released, and the more energy development and this ecosystem can grow faster in a more sustainable way as well. JP, what did you answer on that survey question, please?
Technology also, essentially because it does apply to the other topics. It's the mother of all topics.
It's the umbrella.
100%. We're I know I don't have a lot of time, but if you look at energy over the last, you were saying it's essentially the old industry. Well, it's been always since day one driven by innovation, driven by technology, since the beginning, since the first well, and it's obviously happening more and more as we speak today. Now, again, I want to go back to, because we're talking about energy transition, I want to go back to the same topic I've been talking about initially, which is basically achieving our carbon reduction objectives. There's a few mind-blowing facts if you look into the details of carbon emission, by the way, that are extremely well articulated in Bill Gates' latest book on the topic. I don't have any interest with Bill Gates, but his latest book is mind blowing. Methane emission, which translates, if we link it back to technology, to basically methane venting and flare management. Is flare management actively being done well in our industry? Yes or no? Well, the answer is it's being done, but can certainly be done better, especially in this part of the world, because there's no incentives to do so, apart from potentially basically reducing the leaks and some savings from that. But from a pure environment perspective, let's face the reality. There's no control. Well, there is control, but it's not as strong as it should be. Now, if it was to be the case, technology could address a big chunk of the problem, not all the problem, but a big chunk of the problem. Is that difficult to implement? Not really. Not with the technologies we currently have. Again, I've handpicked one example, Michel. There's so many other examples. These are easy wins.
Absolutely. Dr. Elkadi, what about you? Are you going to break the trend? Did you pick something other than digital technologies?
Well, I started with green hydrogen, and I picked green hydrogen as well. So that was my my choice, let's say. But it's something that it's not only a win for. I see it as really the future of the energy transition from all aspects, from providing energy, from transport aspects. So it is a big chunk of the mix that we will have, and I see the right investments are taking place now. So we just need a bit more, and just to accelerate it and to get the prices even down faster. So for me, that is a bit of the, let's say, the future.
Do you think it should be a concern or should be watched keenly that oil and gas companies don't start investing their attention too much in hydrogen markets at a time when, as already been touched about, we already have a lot of technologies and markets that need to be fully leveraged properly? We still don't have a price on carbon, which arguably is critical to getting that cost parity by 2030 as well, without subsidies. Do you think that the excitement around hydrogen, which is very justified, to potentially a new oil for the 21st century and beyond, do you think that at the moment there's a bit of a risk that it takes the spotlight off other much needed areas such as digital technologies?
No, I don't think so. I think or at least I don't hope so. I think that the companies and the investors are also conscious about that, and they are looking at both, because at the end of the day, if there is a pressure on the oil price, there will be also looking into all possible ways to optimize the cost or reduce the cost, and digitalization is an obvious win. So yeah.
We started off with talking about a major IOC with goals by 2025, and there are many, many others as well that have these very ambitious decarbonisation goals by 2025 and then by 2030 as well, with net zero popping up all over as well. I'm just going to ask a rapid fire survey question before we wrap up. We're just keen to hear your thoughts. The question is, are you confident that oil and gas companies, both IOCs and national oil companies, NOCs, can hit their the public decarbonised targets? So just yes, no, or maybe. Yes, no, maybe. Dr. Priyadarshy?
Maybe.
JP?
The eternal optimist, yes.
Dr. Elkadi?
Maybe.
Maybe. Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much. I think we ended on a somewhat optimistic note about what's next for oil and gas companies with their decarbonisation targets, and what they need to do in 2021 very much seems to be on the digital side. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michel. Thank you, folks.
Thank you. Thank you, Michel. Thank you, JP. Thanks, Dr. Ahmed.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.